In the 1950s, dinner meant more than food. It was warmth, routine, survival. Families gathered nightly around dishes like liver and onions, tuna casserole, and chipped beef on toast. These weren't fancy, but they filled bellies and brought everyone home. Long before takeout or drive-thrus, this was real American cooking. And tonight, we're remembering 25 forgotten dinners that once defined the soul of every working-class kitchen. Liver and onions wasn't anyone's favorite, but in the 1950s it was a dinner table regular, especially when money was tight. Moms knew liver was packed with iron, so they soaked it in milk to mellow the bitterness, dredged it in seasoned flour, and fried it fast in a hot cast iron skillet. Sweet onions caramelized beside it, filling the kitchen with that strong, savory smell you could recognize from the porch. Served with mashed potatoes and a cold glass of milk, it was cheap, hearty, and good for you, even if you needed convincing. Kids grumbled, dads called it good eating, and mothers, they saw it as doing right by their families. The sizzling pan, the clatter of plates, the steam fogging up the windows, that was the sound and scent of home. Liver and onions taught us that love didn't always look like dessert. Sometimes it came with a tough texture and a strong taste, but it stuck with you long after the dishes were cleared. Salmon croquettes turned a humble can of fish into something that felt special. In the 1950s, mothers knew how to stretch every ingredient, and one tin of salmon, some breadcrumbs, a couple of eggs, and minced onion could become dinner for a family of 6. She'd shape them into patties and fry them in a cast iron skillet until golden and crisp on the outside, tender in the middle. The smell was warm, rich, and comforting, especially on a cold Friday night. Paired with mashed potatoes and canned peas, it wasn't fancy, but it filled every plate. The tricky part? Picking out all the little bones before mixing. Kids would sit at the counter chatting while mom worked, sometimes sneaking a bite of the crispy edge. Salmon croquettes weren't about luxury. They were about know-how, thrift, and making something satisfying out of almost nothing. And when that skillet started to sizzle, you knew dinner was nearly ready, and everything was going to be okay. Creamed chipped beef on toast wasn't just a meal, it was a memory brought home from the service. Many 1950s fathers had eaten it in the military, where it earned a few colorful nicknames. But at home, it became comfort food. Moms would melt butter, stir in flour to make a roux, then slowly whisk in milk until the sauce turned smooth and thick. Shredded dried beef went in last, salty and satisfying. Ladled over hot toast, it stuck to your ribs and filled your belly without draining the budget. Kids might have teased it for its looks, but they never left a bite behind. The rich smell of cream and beef drifted through the kitchen while the radio played softly in the background. It was warm, dependable, and tasted better than it had any right to. For some, it was a taste of post-war normalcy. For others, just a weeknight dinner. But either way, it brought people to the table and made them feel full in more ways than one. Tuna noodle casserole was a weeknight lifesaver in the 1950s. Warm, filling, and made from things already in the pantry. Moms would boil egg noodles, stir in canned tuna, cream of mushroom soup, and frozen peas, then pour it all into a glass baking dish. A layer of buttered breadcrumbs on top gave it just the right crunch. While it baked, kids did homework at the kitchen table, and the whole house filled with a smell you couldn't help but love. It wasn't fancy, but it tasted like home. Some moms added cheddar cheese. Others swore by crushed potato chips on top. And every church potluck had 3 versions, each one the best. It was cheap, easy, and fed a crowd, sometimes for 2 days straight. Leftovers were even better the next night. Tuna casserole wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about making sure your family was fed, warm, and together. And that bubbling dish in the oven, it meant mom had it all under control. Beef stroganoff brought a touch of elegance to the 1950s dinner table. without requiring fancy ingredients or formal manners. Moms used budget cuts of beef, slicing them thin to keep them tender. The meat browned in a skillet with onions and mushrooms, then simmered in a sauce made from sour cream and beef broth. Poured over a bed of egg noodles, it felt like something from a restaurant. Even if it came from a small suburban kitchen, the smell was rich and savory, with a hint of paprika in the air. Kids loved the creamy sauce. Dads appreciated the hearty portions, and mothers took quiet pride in making something special out of something simple. It was often served on weeknights when company was coming, because it looked impressive, even though it wasn't expensive. Beef stroganoff reminded families that good food didn't have to be complicated. Just warm, filling, and made with care. And that was more than enough to make any evening feel like an occasion. Meatloaf with mashed potatoes was the beating heart of the 1950s dinner table. Humble, filling, and made with love you could taste. Moms mixed ground beef with breadcrumbs, egg, diced onions, and just the right blend of seasonings, often by hand, in a big ceramic bowl. Some tucked in a surprise, a boiled egg in the center, or a layer of ketchup glaze on top. While it baked, potatoes were peeled and whipped until fluffy, then smothered in gravy made straight from the pan drippings. The smell filled the whole house, drawing everyone to the table before Mom even called. Kids fought for the end slice with the crispy edges. Dads went back for seconds. And Mom? She watched quietly, satisfied. Leftovers meant cold meatloaf sandwiches the next day, almost as good as the original. It wasn't just food, it was a routine, a ritual, and a reminder that something as simple as a loaf of meat could hold a family together. Pot roast with vegetables wasn't just a meal. It was Sunday. In the 1950s, moms would start it early, searing a tough cut of beef in a heavy pot, then adding onions, carrots, and potatoes before sliding it into the oven for a slow, all-day roast. The house would smell incredible by mid-morning, drawing kids back from church with rumbling stomachs. The secret was patience. Low heat and time turned cheap cuts into fork-tender perfection. Gravy made from the pan drippings coated every vegetable with flavor. Families gathered early, sneaking bites before dinner was even served. The sound of the lid lifting, the burst of savory steam, the clink of plates being set, all part of the weekly ritual. Leftovers became Monday's lunch or hash, stretching the goodness even further. Pot roast wasn't about flair, it was about comfort, care, and consistency. And in a world that moved fast, it reminded us to slow down and come home to something warm, familiar, and waiting. Chicken and dumplings was comfort in a pot. In the 1950s, when one chicken had to feed a big family, this was how you made it stretch. Moms simmered the bird for hours with carrots, onions, and celery, creating a broth so rich it filled the house with warmth before dinner even began. The real magic came next. Soft, pillowy dumplings dropped gently into the bubbling stock. The trick? Don't lift the lid. Let the steam do its work. Kids watched with anticipation, noses pressed to the glass, waiting for that first spoonful. The dumplings soaked up every bit of flavor while the shredded chicken melted on your tongue. It wasn't fast food. It was slow love, cooked over time. Some families used biscuit dough. Others made them from scratch. Either way, it was hearty, homemade, and handed down through generations. Chicken and dumplings didn't just fill your belly. It wrapped you in something warm, familiar, and lasting. Shepherd's pie was a one-dish wonder, hearty, practical, and made to please a hungry family. In the 1950s, moms browned ground beef with onions and herbs, then stirred in peas and carrots before spreading it into a baking dish. A thick layer of buttery mashed potatoes went on top, smoothed with the back of a spoon and baked until golden. Some families used lamb, others stuck with beef, but no one argued when dinner hit the table. The meat stayed juicy underneath, the potatoes crisped just enough, and every bite tasted like comfort. On special occasions, Mom made individual portions in little ramekins, making each child feel like they had something all their own. It was simple food, but it felt special. And after a long day of school or work, there was nothing better than that first forkful. warm, savory, and deeply satisfying. Shepherd's pie reminded us that even the humblest ingredients, treated with care, could become something memorable. Chicken fried steak was Southern comfort on a budget, and it made its way onto dinner tables all across 1950s America. Moms would take cube steak, pound it thin, and dredge it in seasoned flour before frying it in a hot skillet until golden and crisp. Then came the white gravy, made from pan drippings, milk, and black pepper, poured over the top like a final touch of love. The kitchen filled with the sound of sizzling oil and the smell of something rich and satisfying. It wasn't steakhouse fancy, but it felt like a treat. Served with mashed potatoes and green beans, it turned an ordinary night into something memorable. Some moms even used a meat mallet to tenderize while working out the day's frustrations. Bang by bang. Kids learned fast not to talk back when dinner sounded like construction. But once it hit the plate, all was forgiven. Chicken fried steak reminded families that with a little effort, even the toughest cuts could turn into something worth gathering around. Fried chicken and biscuits meant something special was happening. In the 1950s, it was the crown jewel of Sunday dinner, the kind of meal you looked forward to all week. Moms soaked the chicken in buttermilk, dredged it in seasoned flour, and fried it in cast iron until golden and crispy. The sound of oil popping filled the kitchen, mixing with the smell of home. Meanwhile, she'd roll out biscuit dough by hand, cut perfect circles, and bake them until fluffy and golden. Served hot with honey or butter, they were almost as loved as the chicken itself. Everyone had their favorite piece, drumstick, thigh, or crispy wing, and you had to be quick if you wanted seconds. Church picnics, family reunions, and birthdays all centered around someone's famous fried chicken. But on quiet Sunday afternoons, when it was just your family at the table, that first bite told you everything was okay. It wasn't just food, it was celebration, tradition, and the taste of being cared for. Sloppy Joes were messy, loud, and downright fun, just like the 1950s kitchen on a busy weeknight. Moms would brown ground beef with chopped onions, then stir in ketchup, Worcestershire sauce, and a spoonful of brown sugar. The result? A sticky, tangy mixture that smelled like comfort. Served on soft hamburger buns and eaten with both hands, no fork in sight, they were the kind of meal where you needed 2 napkins before the first bite. Kids loved them, especially the way the sauce oozed out the sides. And parents loved how easy they were to make in big batches, perfect for birthday parties or casual Friday nights. Paired with potato chips or coleslaw, Sloppy Joes weren't elegant, but they didn't need to be. They brought laughter, conversation, and sauce-stained smiles to the dinner table. And if you got a little on your shirt, that just meant you were doing it right. It wasn't dinner, unless it got a little sloppy. Friday nights in the 1950s often smelled like fish sticks and French fries, quick, crispy, and kid-approved. Moms would pull a box of frozen fish sticks from the freezer, line them up on a baking tray beside crinkle-cut fries, and pop them in the oven. No frying, no fuss. Just dinner in 30 minutes while homework got finished or the TV hummed in the background. Served with ketchup or tartar sauce, the meal hit that perfect balance. Crunchy on the outside, soft on the inside, and easy to clean up. Kids loved dipping, parents loved the convenience, and the golden brown trays brought everyone to the table without complaints. This was the dawn of convenience food, frozen, fast, and family-friendly. While some meals took hours, this one gave moms a break, without sacrificing taste. And for many families, it became a beloved Friday ritual, the unofficial start to the weekend, wrapped in breadcrumbs and smiles. Making cabbage rolls in the 1950s was more than just dinner. It was an act of love passed down through generations. Mothers and grandmothers would carefully blanch large cabbage leaves, soften them just enough to wrap around a savory filling of ground beef, rice, onions, and herbs. Rolled tight like little gifts, they were nestled into a baking dish, then smothered in tomato sauce and slowly baked until tender. The kitchen filled with a rich, tangy aroma that promised warmth and comfort. It took time, This wasn't a quick meal, but it brought the family together. Kids would help mix the filling or spoon the sauce while listening to stories of the old country. Immigrant roots ran deep in these dishes, blending old traditions with new American life. And when the rolls hit the table, steaming and fragrant, everyone felt like they were part of something lasting, something worth keeping alive. Chicken pot pie wasn't just dinner, it was a celebration wrapped in crust. In the 1950s, when a mother pulled one of these golden beauties from the oven, the entire family knew they were in for something special. Inside that flaky, hand-rolled pastry was a creamy filling of chicken, peas, carrots, and tender onions, all simmered in a rich, velvety sauce. Leftover roast chicken often became the base, stretched into something new and comforting. The smell alone, buttery, savory, warm, was enough to bring kids running to the kitchen. Steam would rise as the first slice was cut, revealing a hearty mixture that seemed to say, "You're home." It took time, patience, and care. None of it rushed. But the reward was a dish that felt like more than food. It felt like pride. Moms knew it, dads appreciated it, and kids remembered it. Decades later, many still recall that sound. The soft crunch of a pie crust giving way to a spoon, and the love baked into every bite. Macaroni and cheese was more than a side dish. It was a main event. In 1950s kitchens, it started with elbow noodles boiled just right, then bathed in a velvety cheese sauce made from scratch. No orange powder here, just real cheddar, grated by hand while kids tried to sneak a taste. The sauce bubbled on the stove, thickened with a touch of flour and butter, stirred slowly until smooth. Once combined with the macaroni, it was poured into a deep dish, topped with buttery breadcrumbs, and baked until golden and crisp on top. That moment when it came out of the oven, hot, cheesy, and bubbling, felt like a celebration. Mothers knew they had a dish that could please every picky eater at the table. It wasn't fancy, but it was perfect. It smelled like comfort, looked like home, and tasted like childhood. Just one bite brought warmth, and maybe a little melted cheese smile across every face. Stuffed bell peppers looked like tiny edible treasure chests, and in the 1950s they truly were. Moms would pluck peppers fresh from the backyard garden, red, green, yellow, each one washed, sliced, and blanched just enough to soften. Into each hollow went a warm mixture of ground beef, onions, white rice, and tomato sauce, seasoned to perfection. Children would help spoon the filling, their little hands shaking slightly, proud to be part of something important. A final touch of cheese or breadcrumbs on top, then into the oven it went. The smell? Pure comfort. Tomato, beef, and roasted peppers all melting together. When dinner time came, each person got their own. No sharing required. It felt like being handed a gift straight from the oven. Fathers would nod in quiet approval, kids poked at the peppers but devoured the cheesy tops, and mothers smiled, knowing they'd turned simple ingredients into something elegant. Meals like these taught us that food could be both nourishing and a little bit magical. Corned beef hash wasn't just a meal, it was a second chance for Sunday's leftovers. On Monday mornings, the kitchen came alive again. Leftover corned beef was diced into neat little cubes, then tossed with golden potatoes and sweet onions in a well-seasoned cast iron skillet. The secret? Letting it sit undisturbed until a crispy crust formed on the bottom, the kind of crunch you could hear when it hit the plate. Some families topped it with a fried egg, yolk dripping down the sides, while others served it with hot biscuits or gravy. The smell alone could coax teenagers out of bed. Mothers worked quietly, often with the radio humming in the background, turning scraps into something that tasted better than the original roast. And for kids, it felt like magic, how yesterday's dinner transformed into today's favorite breakfast. Corned beef hash reminded us that, with a little care and creativity, nothing had to go to waste. In the 1950s, that wasn't just smart cooking, it was a way of life. Chili con carne meant something warm was coming. You'd walk into the kitchen and smell the spices before you saw the pot. Ground beef browned slowly, then simmered with kidney beans, stewed tomatoes, garlic, and just enough chili powder to make your nose tingle. Mothers stirred it with worn wooden spoons in heavy enamel pots, letting it bubble low and slow while kids finished chores or homework. The longer it cooked, the better it got. Deep, rich, comforting. Some families served it over white rice, others with buttered cornbread. And if there was shredded cheddar or chopped onions on top, it felt like a feast. Chili nights were casual and hearty, the kind of meal that could stretch across a whole evening while the radio played or the family gathered by the fire. You didn't need fancy ingredients, just time, care, and the kind of flavor that brought everyone back for seconds. In the 1950s, chili con carne wasn't exotic. It was familiar, filling, and always welcome. Spanish rice brought color to the 1950s dinner table. It started with onions and green peppers sizzling in a bit of bacon fat. The smell alone could pull kids in from the backyard. Then came the rice, uncooked, stirred right into the pan until it took on a toasty edge. Crushed tomatoes, garlic, and just enough chili powder followed, turning everything a rich red as it simmered. Ground beef made it hearty. Corn or beans stretched it further, and every spoonful tasted like home. Mothers loved that it used pantry staples and only one pan. Less mess, more time to sit with the family. Some served it with tortillas, others with cornbread. It wasn't fancy, but it was dependable, warm, and surprisingly bold for a time when American food played it safe. Spanish rice reminded us that a little spice and a lot of love could turn an ordinary Tuesday night into something memorable. In the 1950s, nothing went to waste, especially not a leftover ham bone. Ham and bean soup began the night before, with navy beans soaking patiently in a bowl. By morning, mothers dropped the bone into a big stock pot, adding onions, celery, and bay leaf. The house would fill with the warm, smoky aroma by lunchtime. And by dinner time, the broth turned rich and comforting. The meat fell from the bone, melting into creamy beans that needed no fancy garnish. Just a hunk of cornbread and maybe a dash of pepper. This was Depression wisdom passed down, teaching families that with time and care, humble scraps could become a feast. Kids would peer into the pot after school asking, "Is it ready yet?" It was the kind of meal that made winter evenings feel safe, full, and deeply rooted in tradition. When snow blanketed the streets and the wind rattled the windows, moms in the 1950s reached for one dependable answer: beef stew. It began with chuck roast, browned in a heavy enamel pot until the kitchen filled with that rich, meaty aroma. Then came onions, carrots, and potatoes, layered in slowly so each held its shape. A touch of flour and water transformed the broth into thick, savory gravy. It simmered all afternoon while the kids played in wool socks and dads read the paper. The smell alone promised comfort. And when it finally hit the table, served with rolls or poured over rice, it silenced the room. Seconds were expected. Leftovers? Rare. This was more than a meal, it was a ritual of warmth and care. One pot that fed everyone, and memories that stuck longer than the gravy on your spoon. When the wind howled outside and Dad shook snow from his coat, the scent of beef and barley soup drifting from the kitchen meant everything was going to be all right. Mom browned the meat first, cheap cuts that turned tender with time, then added carrots, onions, and a handful of pearl barley. As it simmered low and slow, the barley swelled and the broth thickened into something hearty enough to stick to your ribs. The windows fogged up, the walls felt closer, and supper became more than just a meal. It became a moment. Crackers were optional, second helpings weren't. This wasn't fancy food. It was family food. The kind passed around in enamel bowls, ladled out with love, and remembered long after the chill had gone. It didn't just warm your body. It reminded you that you were home. The kitchen smelled like heaven when Mom made creamed chicken on biscuits. She'd use leftover roast from Sunday dinner, shredded by hand, folded into a thick white sauce, simmering with butter and milk. A little salt, a dash of pepper, maybe peas if we had some. While it bubbled gently, the biscuits baked until golden and flaky, their scent filling the house. She'd split them open, spoon that creamy goodness on top, and call us in. No one was late to the table. It wasn't fancy, but it felt special. Warm, rich, comforting. The kind of dinner that made the world slow down for a minute. You'd soak every last bite, then scrape the plate with your fork. And if you were lucky, there was enough left for lunch the next day. One bite of that creamy chicken, and you knew you were home. That little devil on the Underwood can was a familiar face in 1950s kitchens. Deviled ham sandwiches weren't fancy, but they were everywhere. Moms would mix the salty pink spread with a spoonful of mayo, maybe a bit of pickle relish, then press it between slices of soft white bread. No crusts, no fuss. Just a sandwich you could count on, wrapped in wax paper, tucked into a metal lunchbox beside an apple and a thermos of milk. At school or on a factory break, that creamy, tangy filling hit the spot. It had a little zip, just enough to feel different from plain bologna. And it stretched. One small can fed a whole family's worth of lunches. You'd find it at picnics, church socials, even midnight snacks when Dad raided the fridge. For kids, it meant lunch. For parents, it meant convenience. And for everyone, it meant home. These weren't just dinners, they were rituals. Moments when families gathered, laughter echoed through kitchens, and even simple meals felt like something sacred. If one of these dishes brought back a memory, tell me in the comments. I'd love to hear what dinner looked like in your home. And if this trip down memory lane warmed your heart, give it a like, share it with a friend, and be sure to subscribe for more stories from dear old America.